I just want to take some time today to discuss the work we've been doing with UK development NGOs on climate change, really just from the perspective of the kind of challenges that we're facing with the work, or the development agencies are facing, and then also some of the opportunities for really taking a lead on climate change in the UK and in country programmes and in international negotiations. I think some of the barriers to mainstreaming climate change into development NGOs are around lack of capacity, human resource capacity, not enough people really working in this area. And the development NGOs that are really sort of taking a lead on this, so employing dedicated climate change staff as sort of policy officers, people to champion the issue within the organisation. Also, I think there's a concern that it's not another thing to mainstream. We've got disaster risk reduction, we've got gender, we've got sustainable development, a whole raft of things that have been so-called mainstreamed over the last few years. So climate change, it's a sort of real resistance to thinking of another thing to mainstream. Now there are ways around that I'll talk through in a bit. But then there's also, I think, there's a lack of buy-in from senior figures in organisations. It's sort of, I think, a resistance from directors and sort of international management committees that climate change is something that development organisations really need to engage with. And I think some organisations are still very much in a certain amount of denial over that. It's sort of not what we do best, and environmental NGOs are much more suited to that. But I think there's now a small group of development NGOs who are really pushing forward on this issue, and it makes a lot of difference if, certainly for advocacy, if the big organisations are on side. From an Action Aid perspective, I think, talking personally, I've been quite disappointed that Action Aid haven't been at the forefront of this move. There's been, heard various reasons why this might happen, but because of my experience of working with Action Aid on disasters, and Action Aid being such a progressive organisation in that area of work, I have been somewhat dismayed that they haven't been able to carry this across to climate change. Just by way of conclusion, I want to set out my back of an envelope vision for what a good development NGO should be doing on climate adaptation and climate change more broadly. Firstly, I think it's important to engage strongly with international and national advocacy, particularly, for example, looking at organising side events at the climate change negotiations, bringing local partners to press policy makers to take this up more urgently, but then also at the national level, working with other development NGOs to create networks or groups to bring pressure on national governments to make sure that adaptation is built in as a key policy within government, and also to make sure that the national adaptation programs of action, the NAPAs, the programs within there, become sort of key development challenges, and that those kind of challenges are integrated within PRSPs and other poverty reduction strategies. There's a whole range of things, policy mechanisms that can be put in place that will help people adapt to climate change. I think a development NGO should also be running internal awareness raising campaigns, both within the organisation and with local partners. That can be done in many different ways. And the kind of routes that have been tried before. If the mainstreaming route is one that is a challenge for organisations, then the kind of tools that are already in place for things like screening environmental impacts on disaster risk reduction can be modified just slightly to incorporate climate change concerns. So it's not necessarily a mainstreaming campaign per se, but more of a tweaking of existing practice. I think there also should be external media campaigns. Certainly other NGOs, I think, are beginning to realise that climate change is a fundraiser. So having climate change as a sort of part of the media public relations strategy for a given period, I think is a good way of raising that awareness. I think there's also an opportunity to screen current development projects and current investments that the organisation is involved in for climate risks. I think it's important to make sure that the kind of investments people are making in that the organisation is making in areas that are vulnerable or exposed to climate change are considered very carefully. So money isn't essentially wasted, because in 20 years' time that investment will be completely undercut by a changing climate. That involves a re-engagement with science and to consider what kinds of challenges different areas are going to face and how communities can adapt to that, and make sure that the development projects are in keeping with that information. I also think it's important for a development NGO to support research on this issue. There's still a lot we don't know, particularly how adaptation projects can benefit the poor and the chronically poor. We've got very little understanding at the moment of the capacity of the chronically poor to adapt to climate change, something that we probably consider is quite low, but it may be that there are opportunities to design projects that actually reduce the level of poverty vis-à-vis other areas of society. So designing pro-poor adaptation strategies, I think, is one of the key sort of intellectual challenges and then practical challenges. Certainly I would expect an NGO like ActionAid to be able to take on this challenge as one of their sort of leading areas of work.